I wanted to begin by saying, I travel a bit, and I don't know about you, but isn't air travel it's just awful, isn't it? It's just awful, and by far the worst part is taking yourself apart to put all the stuff on the security conveyor belt, and then I think it's even worse. I always feel so much time pressure to gather up my things on the other side, right? I'd like someone is going to really take my shoes or something, but I gather up my toiletries and my laptop and my shoes and my jacket and my bags, and I was in Milwaukee, and I shuffle over to the place to try to put myself back together, and there was a big sign that said recombobulation area. And I thought, that's the best word ever. So if anyone is feeling discombobulated about social media, I hope in about an hour and a half, maybe you'll feel a little bit recombobulated by it. You all work for NGOs, nonprofits? Is that what we have? Anybody not working for NGOs, nonprofits? What do you do?
Church Fund College, where we do a lot of new media.
Okay, great. Super. So what I thought I'd do is just provide a framework from the network nonprofit of where we are and some stories, and talk a little bit about where we're going, which is integration. Right? We've all tried the tools. We've clicked and poked and pinged and followed and friended, and there's now what? Where do we go organizationally with it? So let's start. Am I just clicking? Yeah, I'm clicking. Let's start on January 12th, 2010. My friend Wendy Harmon has had dinner. She lives in Northern Virginia, and she's doing what she does every night, which is her final check of the channels. I'm sure like many of you, right? We check before we go to bed. She checked her email, she checked Facebook, she checked the blog, and she got to Twitter. And on Twitter, she began to see some messages that read, at Red Cross, Wendy's the head of social media for the American Red Cross, at Red Cross Help, and then an address. And then another one, at Red Cross Help, and then another address. And the addresses weren't familiar to her, and she put them into Google Maps and found that these were calls for help from Haiti, beneath the rubble. People were putting basically messages in a bottle and throwing them out to the Red Cross. And Wendy was listening. She was one of the first people outside of Haiti to learn about the earthquake. And she sent those messages to the State Department and to on-the-ground rescue teams, and in some cases they were able to help, and in others, sadly, they weren't. But think about the transformation of the Red Cross. 5 years earlier was Hurricane Katrina, which was a dismal reaction from the Red Cross, dismal reaction from lots of folks, but in particular the Red Cross that wasn't agile and listening enough to get help where it was needed. They weren't listening online. They didn't have Wendy Harmon. In those 5 years, they've begun to transform themselves from a fortress, right? An organization set up in a defensive posture with a clear inside and outside. And the notion is whatever is inside is safe. Those are the people we know. Those are the resources that we have. And the outside is unsafe territory. That's where the enemies are. That's where the competitors are. That's where the people who want to harm us are. Except in the NGO world, that's also where the donors are. So we'll make an exception. We'll put down the drawbridge. We'll go out, and once a month we'll ask you for $25. Right? That's our relationship with you. That's how we see as resources out there. This is a scarcity model. Right? We never have enough stuff. Now, I spent 12 years running a nonprofit organization. I started it and ran it, called Innovation Network. Every single meeting we had, staff and board, could have been exactly the same agenda, which is what do we do about the fact that we don't have enough time, money, staff? Right? That underrode everything we did. We have these grand plans and these visions, but we don't have enough time and money and staff. When you feel constantly under-resourced that way, then what you do is you put the walls up higher. You try to control everything you can possibly control because it's the only way to sleep at night. And you grab and you pull inside. You pull information in. You pull partners in to do what you want them to do. You pull volunteers in. This is an exhausting way of working. It is. It's an unnatural way of working. To be on the defensive this much of the time means you have to have your guard up all of the time. And it stops you from actually being human. It stops you from being good sharers, stops you from being generous, stops you from feeling good about your work. And I share this from my own experience. After 12 years, I could not do another day of this work. There's an alternative. And what Beth Cantor and I found was that organizations like the Red Cross that are becoming network nonprofits, or organizations like Charity Water that were born as network nonprofits, looked and feel more like sponges, not glass castles. But glass castle still has a wall up, right? When we're in a world that has social media at its center, you find that, like these sponges, they're very simple and anchored to the ocean floor, and they have a very simple function. They just do sponge things all day long. They don't do dolphin things. They don't do starfish things. They just do sponge things. And what sponges do is they let in 20,000 times its weight in water every day. It's porous, and it keeps the good stuff and lets go of the bad. Think about your life. Think about your organization. Do you keep the good stuff and let go of the bad? Right? I'm a New York Jew. We're not made to keep the good stuff and get rid of the bad. We're meant to hold on to all of the injustices of the world, right? And too many of our organizations are like that too. We need to let it go, right? Anybody can ask a question at any time. Feel free. So, we begin with the premise of what social networks are. We have always lived in social networks. We're social beings. We used to call them tribes. We could see them because we lived right there with our tribe. Your tribe was only the people who lived right around you. Then we got the telephone. Then we got the internet. Then we got mobile. And we're moving farther apart from one another. Social network just has two parts. It's got the node, the round part. Those are organizations and people. And the ties, the sticks, the ties that connect them to one another. Social media allows us to create personal networks that are much larger than ever before, much more visible than any before. You can see the number of friends you have on Facebook. You're either popular or you're not, right? And allows us to activate those networks to do something on our behalf. That's brand new, right? Before it used to take a letter or one of those phone trees. Remember the phone trees, right? You call them and you call them, you call them. You can see somebody's age by who knows a phone tree, right? We don't need a phone tree anymore. You just need an update on your status on Facebook to activate the network, right? That's where we're looking at. And now we have a whole tool set that allows us to do that. For anybody who finds social media overwhelming here, a few pieces of advice. First, we're all on the grid. Whether we like it or don't like it, we're all on the grid, right? Everybody has a cell phone? Yes? Works better when you turn it on, I tell my mother, right? The cell phones. You're overwhelmed with email. Yes? Anybody underwhelmed by email? Anybody have too little email? I want to find the person. I'm traveling all over the world. I want to find the one person in the world who says, I don't get enough email. Facebook? Using Facebook? Twitter? Okay. Reading blogs, surfing. This is the tool set, right? The only addition we've had in the last 2 years, the only major addition, has been Google+, which personally I think is just Google needling Facebook just because they can. I think they're just trying to take up Facebook's attention in some ways. But we know what the tool set is. It's videos, YouTube. Email continues to be very, very important, especially for our efforts where our donors tend to be a little bit older. Blogs, Facebook, Twitter. Cell phones aren't a social media tool, but they are a mechanism, a mobile device. Right? That's what it is. They're easy to use. If anybody you know is having trouble using them, it's not because the tools are hard to use. It's because they haven't spent enough time practicing. It's like learning a foreign language. Younger people are more facile with the tools, not because they're actually smarter than us. I have teenage boys. They are not smarter than I am. But because they have more time to practice and because they're absolutely fearless using them. They don't mind making a mistake. We mind making a mistake in particular. We mind making a mistake in public. That's the difference. They are conversational, these tools. Organizations that struggle in the social world are those like fortresses who are used to broadcasting out and expecting everybody to just take in our message and do what we want them to do. We actually had somebody this morning saying, I'm on Twitter. Why doesn't everybody just do what I ask them to do, right? And I thought to myself, that person clearly doesn't have children and clearly doesn't understand social, right? If you send out a message on Twitter, the expectation of other people on Twitter is that you will respond to a question, right? Unless you're Oprah, you're going to respond to a question. Otherwise, you're not going to be social. And finally, for our efforts, the most important piece of the social media toolkit is that it is scalable at no extra cost to us. You can post a YouTube video that gets 500 views. You can post the same video that gets 500,000 views, and it doesn't cost you any more. How do you make something go viral? I don't know. But when it does, it's because of conversations. That's what's spurring all of this. How many emails have you gotten from people saying, this is a great video, go and look at it? Now, there are nodes in the network that are larger. Those are hubs, those are influencers. When they tweet out, go look at this, it's very cool, there will be an increase in the number of views of something. But we have to remember, for our efforts, learning how to connect with people in a conversational way so that they will want to share our messages with their friends, which is the only way something goes viral, is critically important to our work. Okay? All about the conversation. And what's so ironic to me is that conversation is a fundamental human activity. We are born to converse. We're born to stand. We're born to converse. And yet so many organizations struggle with it. And I find that so interesting. Particularly those folks who will say, well, I don't want to sit behind a screen and tweet and chat and do all of that stuff. It's not human. Well, you know what? Press releases aren't human either. And those are the same organizations that keep feeding them out to people. I tell people it's like going to a cocktail party and if somebody asked you what you do, you would reach into your bag, hand them a press release, and then you would just start to talk about your work and yourself and just talk and talk and talk until people would be signaling their spouses to get you out of the corner, right? That's not a human conversation. Another irony of this world is how much time and energy we spend as organizations finding good people, right? We accept all those resumes, we slog through them, we interview them up and down, we check all the references, we find these really smart, eager, idealistic, good people, bring them into our organizations, and what's one of the first things we say to them? We don't trust you to talk about the work, right? Only this person can speak on our behalf as an organization. Have you noticed what young people do when they first walk into the organization in the morning? What's the first thing they do? Check Facebook. Once they've checked Facebook and updated their status and said, today we're going to meet about X, got a busy day, lots of meetings today, the walls are down. The people who are on the outside are now on the inside. People on the inside are on the outside. The wall is gone. Pretending that you can put it back up is a terrible, terrible use of energy. Not only do we have to trust the people we hire to talk about the work, we need to encourage them to do it. You sure you want to sit behind the wall? Come on down here. And then we have a wall, and that would be bad. So if you've read the book, this might be familiar. Or you can sit right there. Now you feel better. You have to. Now that I've called you out in front of everybody 3 times. Okay. Whether an organization is in the process of changing or whether it was born this way, they have common characteristics. That's the left side. This is far more important than whether or not you have a Facebook page, whether or not you're on Twitter. What tools you're using are far less important than whether or not you are being social. Being social means understanding that you are not a standalone fortress. You are part of a larger network. Every person, every organization is part of a larger network, whether you want to admit it or not. By understanding networks, you understand there are an abundance of resources, people who want to help you out there, right? You understand the walls are down so people can see in. You can either fight that or you can celebrate it and share how you do what you do, because that's important to people. You make your work very, very simple, because sharing in networks only happens if people can understand what you do. You can't share something that's complicated, right? If I don't get it, I'm not sharing it with somebody else. If you have an organization that does 18 different things in a way nobody really understands, and I see people nodding back there, I'm sorry. Ain't nobody going to understand it. It's not tweetable. It's not retweetable. When I joined Twitter, Beth Cantor said to me, it's not the tweet that's important, it's the retweet. I had no idea what she was talking about. I usually don't have any idea what Beth is talking about until a couple of months later, when I understood that it's not what I post that's important. It's whether it's shareable that's important. Do you want to send it to your friend, to your girlfriend, to your mother? Right? That's what's important. Complexity is the cholesterol of networks, slows everything down. And yet, what have we done traditionally in organizations? Made them very, very complicated. Why? Because we don't trust the people we have on board to make good decisions. That's why things have to go up the flagpole. That's why we take anything interesting out of them by the time they get to the boardroom. And then they come back down through 14 layers, and 10 days later, you're allowed to send that Twitter message out. I literally find organizations where the CEO has to check the tweet. If your CEO has to check the tweet, you're not in the social world, right? So we got to focus on those things. You don't have to be perfectly great at all of them. You have to recognize them as important and begin to have conversations internally as to how you're doing. Then we can start to get social. Then you can figure out who do we want to talk to and where. That's how you figure out what tool and what channel you want to be on. Then you can start to make friends online who will turn into funders. The Humane Society of the U.S. spent 18 months making friends on Facebook before asking people for the first donation. 18 months. Can your organization wait 18 months to ask people for money? Think about your boards. They want an ROI next month. It's a bad way of working in a social world, right? An ROI means we're going to get a donation right away. You might get that $25 from somebody. You're not going to get another dime from them, right? It's a terrible way of behaving. It is literally, again, like being at that cocktail party and handing that press release to somebody and then saying, give me a check. You would never do that to somebody. Does this make sense? Anybody have a question about it? Can I talk to your board? No, I hate boards. I'm sorry. I really, there's a chapter about boards in it that Beth kept making me tone down because I resent the fact that we assume we're sort of patsies to the notion that because people have been successful in the corporate sector, they will understand how to run our businesses. And I really mind that. And even as the data show, that we continue to stuff our boards with lawyers and finance people, and the boards continue to fail the organizations, we continue to stuff them with Wall Street and lawyers and men. No offense, men. But the bigger the organizations get, the more manly the boards get. So yeah, you're on your own with your board. Good luck. So look, this is what it's going to feel like to your board, right? I've just thrown you over a cliff. Not only have I asked you to unlearn all the things we learned last century in terms of management, but the crux of the matter is I'm asking you to lose control. The fears are real. The fears of changing how we interact with the world are legitimate and real. I understand that. They generally boil down to two very distinct and important things. Fear of losing control of the message and the messenger. Fear of losing control of our reputation. I'm going to tell you this. I need you to listen. You ready? Both of those things have already happened. You have lost control of those two things. Any energy your board spends trying to regain control of the message is a waste of time and energy. The question is, what do we do in this new world where we can't control the things we think we used to be able to? I'm not even sure we could. If you think you haven't lost control, it just means you're not, like the Red Cross in 2005, you're not listening. You're not out on the channels listening to what people are saying. The only way to overcome these fears is to start a conversation internally that begins with policies. We have to have some way of engaging. This is not the Wild West. Used to be, maybe 5 years ago. Now, organizations have the opportunity to shape this world, to put rules around it. The rules give senior staff and boards comfort. The rules give staff and other line people and volunteers direction, which is only fair. What am I allowed to do here? Whose name do I use? Am I allowed to use my own name? How do I express myself? What messages am I allowed to send out? But also to create parameters. For instance, on my blog, the parameters are no profanity, no personal attacks. I'm allowed to take down any comments that contain that. The struggle for organizations that are hesitant about this, in particular those that are so worried about reputation and branding. If you think I got a problem with boards, wait till we get to branding. The problem is they confuse flame-throwing trolls, crazy wingnuts with critics. Critics are people who have a complaint that are legitimate. And too often, organizations just want to pull that criticism down. You've got to leave it up and you've got to engage, either on your site or anywhere else that it happens. That's part of the listening. You've got to go and be part of that conversation for a bunch of reasons. One, because the critic probably represents other people who haven't had the nerve to say it. The critic gives you an opportunity to answer that criticism, and it gives your friends an opportunity to answer on your behalf as well. You have to engage. Social media use is a contact sport, not a spectator sport. You can't sit behind a glass and just watch it. You've got to engage. So I want to show you a few examples of groups that are doing some very interesting things, and then we can have an opportunity to talk, okay? This is the Indianapolis Museum of Art. It was a failing institution before they hired a new CEO who said, we've got to take down the walls. And what they've done that I think is fascinating is many organizations use a dashboard for their management. These are a bunch of data points that you can look at monthly, say, at senior staff and board meetings. How are we doing? How are we doing in terms of fundraising, members, whatever your points are. They not only put the dashboard up, if you click onto any of these squares, you see the trend data, which is the only data that's important. I'm an evaluator by training, right? It doesn't matter how many members you have today. You might have 90 members today. What matters is, did you have 100 last year, or did you have 200 or 80, or which way are you going, right? Hard to know if you're making progress if you don't know which way you're going. They put this out there for the world to know how their fundraising is doing, how their membership is doing. The kinds of data most organizations are very hesitant to put out. And do you know what happened when they put it out? It all worked. Now, this is an integrated strategy. It's not just this alone. They have a great blog where they talk about the trends. They have videos of the curation space. They have live streaming of events. They do a whole bunch of things to take the walls down, to let us in, to show us the reality of running a museum like this. It's hard work, right? They are under-resourced. It's not easy. But also into the magic of curation, right? How do you choose which painting to go up, right? Can we choose? Maybe we can vote on one next month, right? They're changing the relationship between inside and outside. All of a sudden, I'm not an anonymous patron who might show up once a year. I'm a member of their community. I count. I matter. They want to hear from me. I can participate. Okay. So this is a Ning site for this area of nonprofits. It's not a formal association of nonprofits. It's just a group of NGOs working in the same geographic area who share resources, share information. It's public. It doesn't have to be. It could be private. It could be a private Facebook page. But this is a way of thinking about ourselves as a network. If you're working in social services, you cannot possibly be working alone. And if you're working in anything, you're not working alone, right? If you're working with a population of people in need, they don't have one need. You know this. They have a host of needs, right? If somebody's out of work, they have a host of problems that they're probably having mental health problems and job training and a whole bunch of things. This is the beginning of a way of looking at ourselves as a network, not in one of those old-fashioned forced collaborations. You ever been part of one of those? A funder said you have to work with that guy down the street. I was part of those. They were horrible. I hated them. They hated me, right? Nobody wanted to be in the room. We all wanted the money. We all took the money, right? I'm not proud of it. I'm sharing, right? This is different. This is, I can't be successful unless you're successful. One of the things we have to think about as organizations, because there is so much out there and there is so duplication, is what do I do best? And how can I network the rest? Got to think about that. Especially you guys who have the 18 services, right? How do I hone down to what do I do better than anyone else? What do I enjoy doing? What do we get traction doing? And get rid of the others. Because NGOs tend to grow sideways. We grow it because of the funding equation. I understand that we're driven a lot by what's available for funding. Years ago, I was sitting with the head of programs in a homeless center in Washington, D.C. And the development woman burst in the door, and she said, I have great news. We just got $50,000 for a new mentoring program. And she raced out the door. And the program director burst into tears. Now, this wasn't that unusual. I was an evaluator. People burst into tears a lot, right? Burst into tears. I said, what's the matter? And she goes, we don't do mentoring. Right? I think that's pretty typical of what we do. This is one of my favorite stories. Anybody in the arts here? No arts people? Little university? Look, arts people are having the best and the worst of times in social media, right? The worst because they tend to be scared about the sharing of videos and the sharing of their work and how they're going to be compensated. The best because their natural creativity also comes out with social media. Last year, the Royal Opera Company of London, Royal Opera Company, went onto Twitter and said, let's make an opera. Start tweeting us your plot lines. And they gathered up all these tweets during the day, took it to their blog. They're wrestling with the plot, explaining to people why they're keeping what they're keeping, why they're dropping certain things. After 3 months, handed it to a professional composer. September, premiered the Twitter opera at the Opera House of London. Premiered the Twitter opera. Think about opera, Twitter. Come on, right? I mean, nothing is less likely than opera and Twitter, unless you're the Royal Opera Company and you understand if I don't remake my relationship with people out there, we'll be dead. We're going to be dead in 10 years, right? Look at your donor bases. So many organizations have those direct mail donor bases that are averaging 70 years old. You're going to be dead unless you do something like this and say we can, A, have fun out there. Social media tools are fun. It's fun to share things. It's fun to make a video, right? It's fun to participate in something. It feels good. If we can understand there is no more inside and outside, we are all outside, right? If we can understand that people count, they deserve a relationship with us. Each one is important. Each one has something to contribute to our efforts. I think this is the last one. This is one of my favorite stories. We've talked about organizations so far. What we haven't talked about are people we call free agents. This effort was done by a fellow named Andy Litnick. Remember that enormous oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico? And how helpless it felt that we're just sitting there watching all that oil spew into the Gulf every day? Andy is a computer programmer, came home from work one day, matched up the size of the oil spill with Google Maps. So anybody could come and put in their zip code and overlay the oil spill to where they lived. I did this, I was in London, and so did this to show what it would look like if that oil spilled on top of the UK. In a week, he had 2 million views of this. In 1 week, Greenpeace had 200,000 views on their site. So here's a guy who understands how to use the tool set, who made so much happen outside of institutions. Young people are idealistic. They care about causes. They don't give 2 cents about your institution. They are not institutionally loyal. You are responsible for finding the Andy Litnicks. He's not going to find you, and to work with them, because they do have the power to communicate, to organize, to protest, to raise money, to all of these things that only organizations used to be able to do. You have to go out and find them. They are in your networks. Trust me, they are there. They are blogging. They are tweeting. They are doing really interesting things like this. And they want to help, but you have to engage them. So there we go. We're going to get started. If your organization is hesitant, you start with the social media policies. Then you start with a conversation about what conversation do we want to have with whom. Not what tool do we want to use, what conversation. Then the tool follows. But you have to think about who's going to continue to stir the pot on this conversation. Doesn't have to just be staff, can be board members, volunteers, collegial agencies, lots of people out there when you start to look into the network. And then you need to find an experiment and to get started. That was a lot of information. I would love to have a conversation with you. Thank you very much for your time and your ears on that. So tell me what you're thinking. Yeah.
I've been working with nonprofits for 10, 15 years now, and had a couple of successful ventures. But what I'm working on now takes what you're doing and you're understanding the tool sets, and maybe moves it up. But instead of having a social network, we're working with a social production platform. So what that means is we're taking the Hospice Association material, the hospices throughout our province, we're engaging them into a Facebook-like private portal. They're invited. They have 10 training modules. They completed one as a prototype through Twin Funding. And they have a sense of how to engage the community. So what we're doing is we're applying for additional funds. We're going to put that into the social production platform and invite the entire hospice community to come in, and we'll second members from that community and we can pay them to work on the training portal. The idea is we have long-term care facilities who want some training, other areas that we want training, but because the hospice community is well versed in public care, when we do training for other organizations, we can sort of crowdsource it.
Great.
For additional work. So
super. That's great. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Yeah.
Any thoughts on Facebook material? They're so easy and simple to use and they're great for the conversation. Then linking that back in with the website.
Yeah.
The website's very static. It's got way too much information.
Yeah.
Tips on websites creating conversations around that, or should we think of that as a different tool?
That's just a great question. The question is, what to do about linking the social channels with the website. And, a lot of thinking has changed around that in the last year. So if you'd asked me that last year, I would have said, don't spend too much energy on the website, get to where people are on the various channels. But now we're seeing some research that says people want to be, if they're engaged with your cause, not new to it, they want to be engaged on your site. They feel a little safer there. They want, your content. So I don't think it's an either or. I think there needs to be a hybrid model of, I would love to see a blog on your site, a place where there is some conversation. Then you are linking to one or the other. It doesn't have to be both. It's a lot to man. There might be a place that's better for you than the other. See where you get more traction. So you don't want to just be on your site, but you don't want to just be out on the tools as well. Okay, so they are supporting one another. And of course, the third leg is on land, right? None of what happens on social media replaces the need to continue to meet with people and organize in person. It augments it. And so there has to be an integrated online, on land strategy as well. Because you don't have enough to do. That's it. Somebody has something.
I'm wondering the factual ways, based on your previous experience, how to turn the social media into a commercial tool for people institute to work on their social media, like in last name. What are the effective ways?
I'm not sure I understand. Okay.
What turn the social media into a commercial tool. You say this, use of the tours, marketing, sales, to make money.
Yeah, that's not my area of expertise. I'm really not familiar with how to make money off of the channels. Sorry. Yeah.
We're struggling with, we started with a blog. It's for an organization that does community services for seniors in our area, and we realized that it's really caregivers that are the biggest readers. So we're targeting our blog at younger people. We're calling it Getting Up There. It's a kind of fun name for the blog and the Twitter and the series that we're doing. But because we want to be a resource for information about caregiving
Yeah.
and also about the aging process.
Right.
So you don't have to just be a caregiver, just the aging process.
Right.
And we were kind of nervous about, we're doing this, doing this kind of fun thing. When do we start slipping in that we have these services here and
Yeah.
you come in, because we feel like we're doing some sort of dating thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, they should know about us. We're a nonprofit. We're not
Right.
trying to.
Yeah, you don't want to feel like you're baiting anybody. I think it's fabulous if you're getting traction with the caregivers as readers of the blog, because it is such a population in need that's so isolated. I think that's amazing. And I think it would be really interesting if you found a couple of, I don't know if you thought of this or not, have some of those caregivers become bloggers as well,
We're trying to do that.
because they have their stories to tell. There's absolutely nothing wrong with you saying to the community that you have a particular service to provide. It is what you do. I would build it around stories, though. The reason why social media works so well for social change is because of the stories, the videos we can see, the personal stories people can tell. So if there's a service you want to tell people about, maybe it's training of caregivers or respite, or I don't know what it is, if you had in a caregiver's words what that service did for them and then a link to it, I think that would be enormously powerful. Okay? Keep linking, keep telling stories. Those are the commerce on blogs. And stick to that, I'm not done. Stick to that niche, because blogs work well in narrow niches. They're not broadcast, okay? Stay with the caregivers for a while. Let it take off. Somebody else? Yeah.
I think we're actually experiencing the opposite of, rather than trying to put policy in place or trying to contain staff enthusiasm, we are actually, I'm here with my other management colleagues.
Yeah.
And, so our staff is not really, we're enthusiastic about social media, but
you're running
not so
uphill
much.
internally.
And
Yeah.
part of it's just not being familiar with technology.
Right.
And especially in small shop social work, we're 15 years
Yep.
back.
Yep.
And some of it too is just, I think it could be intrinsic in our work. Like we're with the women's shelter, we're used to having the stone walls,
Yep.
bulletproof windows,
Yep.
So we're very much.
You literally
also-
are in a fortress.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
So we're trying to be more open.
Yeah.
I think we do a really good job in terms of sharing stories across the organization, largely through some of its through fundraising, but also with our other types of media. But it's it'd be great to hear from frontline workers.
Right.
And try to engage in a conversation with people who are experiencing this or in the community.
Right. Right.
So we're trying to figure out
Right.
the absence of enthusiasm. How do we start?
That's a great question. I love that. In the absence of enthusiasm, it's such a lovely. Canadians are such nice people. They would not have put it that way in New York. So, perfect question. And first, let me back up. God bless you for doing the work you do. It's really important work. It is very legitimate for the organization to have the concerns that it does have. You're taking care of people who are in a very precarious situation. There are a number of different constituents who would be enormously helped by having you out on the channels. And the way to begin is to identify one small experiment this year where you can say to your leadership, we want to reach out to women who, I'm just making this up, who are at risk and may not know about our help. And the place to do that is Facebook, right? That we know our women tend to be on Facebook. We're going to give them a private place to go, try to protect. I would have to think it through more, but a way to say this is the easiest way for them to access us safely. So we're going to try over the next 3 months. We're going to create a private page. We're going to, craft this thing, and we're going to see how it goes. So it's a standalone experiment. You're not asking the organization to turn itself upside down. You're asking to see if we can learn something about engaging our community this way. And get your social media policies in place and just start there. Start very safely, but you have to do something. You have to have a conversation because your community, your constituency desperately needs you out there. Otherwise, they can't find you, right? You have to be where they are somewhere, right? It would also be a beautiful thing to have on your blog stories anonymously of women who've been served by the shelter.
Your experience in some is very similar. We work in the sector of distress lines, so the condition of anonymity is massive.
I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
It's anonymous callers.
Yeah.
It's a crisis suicide prevention line.
Okay.
And so recently the leadership has agreed for us to use social media tools, but it's highly restricted. Enthusiasm is, I wouldn't say it's resistant, I think
Yeah.
it's fear.
Yeah, sure.
We do want to start a blog around stories.
Yeah.
Storytelling, because that's our biggest area of
Right.
research development. But there is a lot of fear about sharing and whether we would actually frighten off our constituents. While at the same time we're trying to reach our donor base and
Right.
getting the message out that we're here.
Right.
Because physically you can't find us, but through telephone.
Right.
So I don't
Right.
know how we could talk about it because it's considered, unsexy. We're not going to Haiti.
Right. Everybody always thinks everyone else's cause is sexier. Isn't that interesting? Right? So the first thing we have to do is to honor the fear, right? We can't ignore it. We can't pretend it's not there. Let's put it in the middle of the table and start the conversation with, these are the reasons why we're hesitant to do this. Right? Now, the good news about having this conversation right now, unlike 3 years ago, we have a critical mass and growing of stories of groups just like yours that have inched their way out. So you can put up a Twitter stream from somebody doing something similar and say, look at what they're doing, right? Put up a Facebook page of somebody working in a similar area. Look at this conversation. You can find those conversations out there. Beth's blog, I think, is the best place to start. She does such a beautiful job of this. So you recognize the fears. You show other examples. And again, just like we were saying over there, you find a safer place to start. Twitter might be a very good place for you because people can read your tweets without revealing themselves, right? And you can share the stories. You can share links back to the blog. And you can connect with other people doing similar work there that gives you more ammunition, again, internally. Every time you can bring stories back internally of look at what they did and no harm done, it helps your case. Because that's what the fear is about. The fear is about, I'm going to step out on this limb, remember, fly off of that cliff alone. You're not alone. Everybody is where you are. Everybody is inching their way out. So keep bringing the stories back internally. Okay? Yeah.
There's a lot of fear for not-for-profits who want to use social media. I think we as consultants kind of like almost doing two things to help you get past that. Is asking point blank, what are you afraid of?
Yeah.
Specifically, and that's they're all different organizations. You would think that not-for-profit would want to fundraise, for example. So that social media is hard to feel for. I've done a lot of work in November across the Cancer Canada, and they are all over it.
Right.
The thing is, one thing I find that alleviates a lot of things for law firms who are very restricted, school boards who are even more restricted.
Right.
And if
Right.
person who reads the pronunciation can misspeak on reading it.
Right.
So there's nothing to do with it. So
Right.
policies.
I think that's just right. I think what you speak to in terms of needing to train and advise staff people in the same way you would train them to answer the phone the way you want them to do that. Provide talking points for people on a regular basis to correct staff that have gone a little bit off course, to very agilely go out and apologize if somebody has made a mistake. It's not that anybody expects mistakes not to happen. It's what's the organization's reaction once a mistake has happened, which is to go out quickly and apologize. These things happen. Red Cross had somebody go on Twitter a couple of weeks ago talk about going out drinking because she thought she was on her private Twitter account and she was on the Red Cross account. They went out very quickly, apologized, said they took her keys away as a joke. Mothers Against Drunk Driver came on and thanked them for doing that. You know, so this is real life. Even if we weren't brought up generationally to live in public, the fact is that we now are all living in public, and everyone recognizes that mistakes happen in public. The question is, are we prepared to react agilely and openly and transparently when they do? Yeah.
So a separate conversation, but wondering if any of us are multilingual, because we work with immigrants, so
Yeah.
a lot of different languages.
Yeah.
And we want it for all the community, we want it for all the neighborhood, and we want to make it accessible.
Right. The question is about being multilingual on the channels. Are you finding that the only place I have worked on this is in Israel, where they're speaking English, Arabic, and Hebrew. And what they found there, I don't know how applicable this is here, they actually are finding that people of different languages are gravitating to different channels. So Facebook is the channel for the Arabic speakers. Email continues to be the channel for the Hebrew speakers. And English is the channel for the donors, basically, which is a different story there.
It has to be,
That,
as much as you want it to be mixed in.
it can't be mixed in because you're leaving somebody out. It's very. Does anybody else have experience, view with multilingual populations?
Yes, but I had a question.
Well, why don't we stick with this for just a second? Anybody else have experience working? Yeah.
Yeah, in a previous project in India, we've had speakers in Swahili and English as well, and we tended to gravitate to Twitter. The Swahili speakers used to use that a lot more.
Yeah.
And the bloggers were mostly English and Spanish. But we had staff that were multilingual that were watching the traffic and responding.
Right.
So it's up to the sports habit.
Well, yeah, it's up to following where people are, to asking them, where they're most comfortable. Sometimes as staff, we forget to just ask people what they want, and so that's an opportunity to see if there's anybody in your network of that language who wants to help monitor some of these conversations as well. Somebody else have a conversation?
I was just going to say that some organizations have two separate Twitter things and two separate Facebook pages for each different language. So, like even big stores and things that follow, like clothing stores have a French page and an English page.
Yeah.
Here in Canada,
Right.
they have a French account and an English account, and then your groups can just choose which account to follow. You
Right.
send your messages in these languages.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so I can't remember 100% what the details were, but I did, earlier this year I was talking to BSO, which does international volunteering programs, and I asked them this question, and so this is where, it's a case study on their website, and I can't remember 100%, but I think what they said was just that they had thought about separating them into two different channels, and ended up finding that it just kind of worked okay to have it in one place and have each language respond to that language, and that they had more English stuff anyway, but
Right.
I think that was what they found. But you can I could look it up.
That's interesting. So you guys can connect about that. Anybody else? Yeah.
Just a question. Do you find that most not-for-profits when they start thinking about this is basically the revenues, will they use it for the campaign side of things to raise money, or do you want to maybe this is a question I guess for everybody at this point, or use it more as an ongoing way to spread awareness, keep the message. So is there
Right.
by long shot. But just because people are more interested in that particular charity,
Right.
they're not a member. But in general, like other charities like Red Cross or all year round type of thing, and they have focusing events like the flood, for example, which will collect money for just as far as an ongoing daily fund.
Right.
That's more the case.
So certainly many organizations come to social media either because they are in trouble, like a Red Cross was in 2005, or because they have an exciting event or campaign. They join a fundraising contest or some such. Those groups won't find it sustainable until they figure out what ongoing conversation they want to have. That's that point of being social first before you jump into the doing. Nothing wrong with jumping into the doing. You just won't be sustainable. You won't build a sustainable community until it's clear that you are there to have a conversation with people, not just to ask them for things. Right? This is the hard part about having senior staff who are hesitant about getting into social media, whose first, and boards in particular, we're back to boards. Boards will ask the question, what's the ROI? And they'll ask it way too soon, right? Because you can't say, I'm going to have a financial return on the investment of creating community here in the next 3 months. You don't know how long that's going to take. In addition, there has to be an investment in building community. It takes time. It takes trust, which we don't necessarily have. People don't naturally trust institutions anymore. So it's important to build time into community building, into practicing, into experimenting, into failing and learning. Not easy things for organizations, as all part of this larger building a community over time that can then be asked to help donate as well. Yeah.
You mentioned that what I discovered in this room is probably the number of EDs who work for nonprofits.
Yeah.
There's quite a few more mature or older EDs who work for nonprofits and have a phobia of technology.
Yep.
And I think that is, to me, a serious problem.
Yep.
On how do you address that and how do you bring them into the fold and how do you have them understanding what's going on, because they're petrified. So that's my biggest challenge, is working with the people with knowledge and experience and insight,
Right.
and are phenomenal at teaching and training and
Right.
are committed but cannot make that jump.
So this is the biggest problem in the nonprofit sector right now, is that we have a generation of executive directors who are resisting this change. And if I hear one more time, that's not for me, that's for the kids, right? Someone's going to have to start to pay me for that, because that's not good. Look, at some point, those people are going to have to challenge themselves to change, because you can't change somebody. We have all these social workers in the room, right? Do you want to address this? Okay, I'll go quickly, right? This is where boards can help them, right? Because technically those EDs do report to boards, and boards have to say, we need to be behaving in this kind of way. That's the only way the change can come internally if it's not being driven by the ED. You want to take that, and then we'll go ahead?
Yeah, one of the things that Amy and I did, we were that kind of helps, and our CEO is not, super excited about social networking, social media, and we started setting up sessions with him where we signed him up for Twitter, we told him who he had to follow, and then we actually train him, and he's becoming less and less scared.
That's great.
Of technology over time, so it's working.
Is he tweeting?
No, not yet.
Okay.
We haven't released him.
Okay, but he's understanding it into the wild.
I just wanted to, this is RED, our organization, Shelley. And she actually encouraged me to come here, and if you can give advice on maybe on that.
Well, I guess I really kind of identify with that because I'm the age, the kind of baby boomer age where it's not something you grew up with or feel comfortable in, and definitely not a techie. But for me, and so I, you others who have to learn more, who have more expertise. But for me, I find the potential of social media and what can be done and how we can do things and how we can connect, I think, so exciting. My background is community development, and I see it so much from that context. And so even though I'm not terribly technical, I'm driving, actually as the ED, driving my management team and staff crazy about getting much more into social media. And I find it really exciting.
That's great. That's great. One way to start, if you're not lucky enough to work for Shelley, one way to start is to have the ED find a personal passion they can follow on Facebook or Twitter, right? So I know one CEO who's a baseball nut. And so he started to follow sports writers who were writing about the Yankees. And he finally built up his courage to send a tweet to one of these beat reporters asking a question. And that beat reporter answered him. And this was like the best day ever. Right? He got an answer. And it was this huge aha moment of, I'm not anonymous. It's not a black hole. It's a conversation. So if they can start around something that they're excited about, that they follow normally, it will seep into their professional work as well. I'm so glad you guys are doing those tutorials. That's fantastic. Yeah.
By the way, you are awesome. I wish every person in our problem was just like you. That's what I say. It's a lot of times matters of perspective. I gotta say, so I think one of the major fears people have is that this particularly how technical it may or not be, and that's what they don't get around because it's just something they don't understand. Some people who are a different generation,
Right.
amazing. The way I use describe what I'm working about with author, I try to liken it to something that's a little bit easier to understand as far as conceptually. So the idea is you're a non-profit. You need people to care about you. You need awareness.
Right.
So social media can do that for you. Let's say you went through a campaign or a fundraising campaign for an event. And you say, okay, great. And you tell them the best part of social media is the then one part of it. So you have this community, whether you have it online through email, through Twitter or Facebook, what do you do with them going forward? So November it ends in December. You be sure that there's updates throughout the year to keep this community interested, and then next year people might not delay this year, next year, or become donors or start a routine. The idea is to take this community and make them active by staying in touch. So you just kind of tell someone, so without going any technical, say this is a way we're getting people interested and we're staying in touch with them without spamming their email boxes.
Right.
Without having to cold call them and send them email letters from them or
Right.
donation. We're being there for them, and that's I find that they're much more understanding and that way.
Right.
Rather than saying that Twitter is also social
Right.
media and Facebook is
Right.
give them an example of
Right.
successfully.
Right.
But I mean, across the line, a lot of nonprofits sort of operate similarly. So they want people interested in it, public or government, or might hold an event or gala that often does that.
Mm-hmm.
And then take that and then use social just another channel just to get in touch with them. So to say, it's like phone calling without phone calling.
Right.
And then they get it.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I have a question about what you said when you started out with Wendy and the social media, how she found this call from the beginning. So, wasn't here, you mentioned Google Maps connection with that. How did that happen? So,
She was getting messages with addresses in them from Haiti, and she put it into Google Maps because she didn't know where it was to find out it was Haitian.
but the messages came from tweets or?
From tweets. Yeah, people had their cell phones
Okay, so then she was able to find the locations with the Google Maps.
and sent the locations to rescue groups. Yeah.
Next question, sorry.
That's okay.
So where you want to have, on one hand, you want to have strong engagement where when people are sharing stories, or on the other hand, that's the whole issue of confidentiality.
Yep.
So, but video is great for that, in terms of getting emotion, in terms of privacy, but at the same time, people don't be up there on YouTube. So, has there been any thought on, say, putting it on a private video channel, or how effective is that? And then so you can just channel it to everyone
Right. So this is a question about concerns about privacy and using private channels instead of public channels. I think understanding the parameters of your own community and the concerns about privacy, particularly in anybody doing social work, mental health work. I mean, these the women's shelters. These are critically important issues that cannot be minimized. We are not. Nobody who does the work I do is suggesting that everything go online and everybody, is revealed online. So we need to know what the parameters are. There are people using sites like Ning, which is like a private Facebook. What's the private Twitter? People using the private Twitter. Yammer. Right, which is like a private Twitter. Corporations are using it. Some larger nonprofits are using it. It depends, again, on what the conversation is that you want to have, right? If this is a conversation where we want to ask clients of ours who might want to connect with one another and reveal their identities, then that might be fine, right? If we're looking to connect with donors, then that doesn't make a lot of good sense, or volunteers. So, yes, people are using the private channels. I think it takes a little bit more work because you've got to invite people in and really stoke that conversation. There isn't going to be any serendipity there. People aren't going to stumble across your site and say, gee, look what I just found, and share it with their friends. But it could be appropriate given the concerns you might have about your clientele or your population.
And once you build your list and you know what your list is, then you send it.
You absolutely could send it to your list. It won't grow this way.
Yeah, so I guess that's growing the list. I was wondering how does, like Facebook BBC, for instance, it lost its phone.
Right.
And it's has been a lot of success with our avenues. And because of the kind of people, when you're having these conversations, see on Facebook, just like to use it as it's not about time on Facebook, especially.
Right.
So
Right.
how effective, like, would you recommend that? Or how
Again, it's going to depend on what you want to do, and I know that can be a little bit frustrating. You do have to invest time in whatever channel you're working on to make friends. And it's making friends the same way you would in life, which is by being generous, right? So on Twitter, for instance, the rule of thumb is 70-30, 80-20, whatever you want to say. The big part is talking about other people's work. The little part is talking about your work. The reverse, again, of what we were taught in graduate schools and in organizations. It can't just be me, me, me. Nobody cares, right? Nobody's going to read your press release on Twitter. So when you reveal yourself to be generous, to be a good sharer, to be a good friend, other people will friend you. They will trust you. And when you have something about yourself to share, they'll share it with other people. So it does take some work to build that trust and authenticity in the network. I think I am going to wrap it up if you don't mind. I do have to get back to New York. I do want to thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for the work that you do. God bless you for the work that you do. And I hope that this year, particularly for those of you who are working in organizations that are hesitant, I hope this year you can find one small place to play and have a little bit of fun and to be social. It will feel great. I promise you that. Thank you very much for your time.